Hi, we are honored. Crime Spree Magazine is honored to have best-selling authors known for their books with the Amish. So maybe you could just wave as I say your name. Laura Bradford writes mystery books. A Killer Carol was part of the Amish mystery series. And she also writes Amish women's fictions, her latest, Piece by Piece, which was out in July. Amanda Flower writes cozy mysteries, her latest, Marshmallow Malice, which is part of the Amish Candy mystery, and Matchmaking Can Be Murder, which was part of the Amish Matchmaker mystery series. Marta Perry writes Amish mystery books, Amish Protector, which is part of the River Haven series, and in Amish women's fiction, which is part of the Promised Glen series. Her latest, A Springtime Heart, was also out in July. So we got 2 Amish books out in July. Okay, ladies, first question. Why do you think people like reading about the Amish? And I'm going to start with you, Laura. So take it away.
I think they like the simplicity, honestly. It's kind of interesting from a mystery standpoint. It's kind of fun to see the almost old world aspect of life with the modern world happening around it. I think that's what I find fascinating. And I think with women's fiction, really, they dress differently than we do. They may speak a little bit differently than we do sometimes. They work at a different pace, but they're people just like we are, and they experience all the same emotions that we do. So I think it makes them both fascinating and people we can relate to as well.
Okay, what about you, Amanda? What do you think?
I would definitely agree with what Laura said, and just I think especially right now when things are kind of crazy and people feel a little bit out of control, that simpler life that the Amish lead away from technology. I live in Ohio, so I've been to Amish country during this pandemic time, and honestly, they're not behaving any differently than they normally do. So I think it's that kind of escapism from reality and simplicity people want.
And Marta, what do you think?
Well, the one thing I hear most from readers is that they remember their childhood, many of them, when life was simpler, as we've all said, and they kind of yearn for not just a simpler life, but also for the warmth and the closeness of family. Because most of us now don't have family living close by. We have 3 kids and they're scattered from Charleston to Salt Lake City to Denver. So, and I think most of us are like that. So it's refreshing, I think, to read about the extended families that are so prevalent. And one thing about the Amish continuing right through the pandemic without changes, I happen to have placed an order for a handmade wooden shelf unit for my dishes from an Amish company. And they were apparently the only ones who were really affected by the pandemic in terms of getting all the supplies they needed and also getting things shipped. But it finally came in and was delivered here, and I'm just delighted with it. So
that's cool. Yay. Yeah, and also community, I think. You know, we don't have the same community that a lot of us had when we were growing up. It's just, you know, and I think the Amish have that strong sense of community as well. Okay, next. Why did you decide to write Amish stories? And we'll start with you, Amanda.
Well, I was writing cozy mysteries, and it was just a situation where I was pitching ideas to my literary agent of new cozy ideas that I had, and I didn't impress her with any of them. And I in my early 20s, I'm retired from being a librarian, but I was a librarian for 15 years. So I was a librarian in Amish country, And I just kind of threw it out there. I was like, well, I was a librarian in Amish country, so I could probably, like I could write about the Amish, and it was right. And I think all of us started about that time. It was right when Amish fiction was just skyrocketing like crazy. And she sold the series really, really quickly. She sold 2 series. So that's kind of how I started into it. So at first, when I told her that, I was like, oh no, because once I said it, I couldn't take it back. But I'm really glad I did.
Well, we're glad you did too, as a reader.
Thanks.
Marta, what about you? Why did you decide to start writing Amish
Well,
stories?
I've always lived in rural Pennsylvania, and I grew up around Old Order Mennonites and Old Order Amish. And so I've always had that background, but did not think about writing about them. But I was in the midst of a series for Love Inspired. And the series happened to be set in southern Pennsylvania, in York County. And as I was writing, it occurred to me that this main character needed some people to do some construction for her. And granted, where I'd placed the town that she was in, it was very logical to bring in these Amish craftsmen to do that. And so they kind of walked into the scene and sort of took over, but I didn't know how my editor would react to that. And after she read it, she said, those Amish characters, I'm raised for things to go terribly wrong. And she said, we all like that. We want you to do more of that. And so that led to a whole series of love-inspired books, which are still going on, plus the books the suspense books that I do for HQN, and now the Berkeley women's fiction books.
And you, Laura, what do you think? Why did you?
It's kind of like with Amanda. I was writing cozy mysteries. I had a series I was actually writing under a pen name, and I wanted a series under my own name. So I kind of looked at the Amish, and at that point, Amish was really big in the romance. I mean, they were selling everywhere, but they didn't really seem to be doing much in cozies. And then, so I went in with that aspect, and I've always been fascinated by them anyway. Just the way that they live, I think is interesting. So it was a perfect backdrop for a cozy mystery. And then from there, it kind of branched into the women's fiction. So
Cool. Okay, so now I'm gonna really briefly summarize your most Amish books, but like really briefly, and then I'm gonna like hit it, and you guys can take it over from there. So Marta, yours is a springtime heart, and I think it's how people change and the role of family that plays in the book, and you can expand on that.
Okay. A Springtime Heart is this one. It's the second book in a series, the current series that I'm doing for Berkeley. I've done others, but this book, this series has been very much about families. And the one thing I love about these kind of bigger books, longer books, is that I can really develop the relationships, not only between the 2 main characters, but also their relationships with not just with each other and their immediate family, but with the community, with other people. And in this particular book, a man who was sent away by his family for getting into trouble as a teenager has come back now as a man and wants to reconcile with his family, and also has in mind to see again the girl whom he was trying to save from a difficult situation when he was caught instead. And so their love story develops among a lot of conflicts among the families and relationships. And as Elise said, the fact that relationships do change. He was a boy when he went away, he was a teenager. And now that he's come back, he's a man. His younger siblings have grown, other things have changed. And so he has to develop new relationships with them, as well as a fresh relationship with the person that he's coming to love.
Yes. Laura, now I have to say, guys, when I was reading Laura's book, I kept saying, thankfully, there is no tissue shortage, because I
Oh. Sorry about that.
tissues, but I think you'll understand. You'll understand why in a sec. So your latest, Laura, is Piece by Piece. It's how people handle grief and the role that motherhood plays.
Yes. All right, Piece by Piece. Yeah, really, just briefly, main character is this perfect mother. You know, she's the one who volunteers in all the classrooms. She's the one that takes her kids and has them in all the activities. She's has the best birthday parties. And in one moment of time, she is struck with a tragedy. She essentially loses her whole family in a single instant. And she's obviously left reeling. She doesn't know what to do. She's not sure she wants to go on. And she starts second guessing everything she's done to this point. All of a sudden it's, maybe I wasn't such a good mom. Maybe I pushed my kids. Maybe I did this, all that second guessing we do in grief. And she goes to Amish country to heal. She is drawn to a childhood friend that she has had as that's been a pen pal for her whole adulthood at this point, of a Amish girl she met as a child. And she goes there, and it's through there that she learns, sometimes we're so quick to offer grace to other people when they're grieving, and we don't necessarily aren't comfortable with it coming back to ourselves. And through other people and through their tragedy and their grief, she learns to put her life back together piece by piece.
And Amanda, your books are more humor oriented, I would say. I mean, there's, you know, you sometimes, like in your last book, Marshmallow Malice, you do have a little, you know, with the alcohol that played a role into it. But you know, you're mostly like the character's wedding was like a hilarious scene. So take it from there.
So my latest Amish book was Marshmallow Malice, and yes, my my Amish stories are definitely humorous. So this series, and then it has a spin-off, the Amish Matchmaker, in the same world, are all humorous, cozy mysteries. And then in this book, Juliet Brody is finally getting married to the local pastor. Juliet is the mother of one of the sheriff deputies that is dating my protagonist, Bailey King. So during the wedding, a bunch of hijinks happen, including her potbelly pig getting loose and, you know, ruining the wedding cake. But the big thing that happens is a woman runs in during the ceremony and claims that the groom has done her wrong somehow. And then as we do in Cozy World, the next day she shows up dead. So Bailey and her boyfriend, Aiden, the deputy, have to find out what happens. And it does lead into alcohol. That people might not know that the Amish don't necessarily, depending on their order, abstain from alcohol. So I do touch on that a little bit in the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you forgot to talk about the wedding dress.
Oh, and yes, the wedding, the bridesmaid dress, my main character is the maid of honor, and it's all covered in polka dots, and she looks like a cupcake exploded. It's like the worst bridesmaid dress you can imagine. I'm getting married in a few weeks, and I let my bridesmaids pick their own dresses. So whatever they wear, it's on them.
Right. How many of us have been bridesmaids and thought about the dress that we had to wear and the money that it costs, and knowing we're never going to wear that dress again?
Yeah.
Okay. So what about describing a little about your main characters, and if you want to include any backstory in it, that would be great. So Marta, why don't you take it away?
All right. I'd already said a little bit about the characters in the Promised Land series. Thomas, who comes back after having been sent away, is the oldest son of a pastor, and his father really expected a great deal of his oldest son, as often happens. He thought he was he wanted him to be perfect. It would be terrible if his children were the ones who went against the ordinance, who got into trouble with the church, who were possibly under the ban. And this was something that he felt very, very personally. And so he put his expectations on Thomas. And Thomas, unfortunately, got into trouble, but it was not really his fault. He cared very much for the female lead, for Dorcas, and Dorcas at that time was something of a wild teenager and was one who would go to the parties and wanted to experience, some other things than the traditional singings that one is supposed to do when one is a teenager. And so, in effect, he rescued her, helped her to get away when the police raided the party, and took the blame when she was able to get away. So he's that kind of person. He's very responsible and takes care of others, but it cost him a great deal.
And Dorcas is direct, right?
Yes, Dorcas was really repented of her wild teen years, and what means a great deal to her that she never was caught, but she realized how much Thomas ended up paying for her misdeeds, and she turned around completely, became very serious and responsible, and became eventually the teacher at the Amish school, a position she loves and cherishes, and really is very important to caring for the children.
Okay, so Laura, Danny, and Lydia, and Caleb. So go for it.
Well, like Danny, I said she's the gold medal mom who does everything, perfectly. But when she gets to Amish country, she sees Lydia, who is a very different mom. She, as an Amish mother, doesn't have her kid in piano lessons and, all the things that Danny's kids had done. She's the one who will sit there and maybe look at a flower with her child, or discuss how to plant something, or what's the best way to take care of an animal. And so Danny is seeing this and comparing that to the way she mothered. And so it's interesting how she kind of uses that to put Lydia almost up on a pedestal, that she must have been a better mother. And so she questions that. And then I have Caleb, who is Lydia's brother. And he's someone who has watched his sister, Lydia, has also gone through tragedy. And that's one of the reasons she wanted Danny to come stay with her, because she knows what grief is like. And then there's Caleb in the middle, who's watched his sister go through an awful situation, and how he felt so helpless. So he really wants to kind of try to help Danny. And it's just, all these people are brought together by grief, and they all help to heal each other. And that's what I found to be beautiful. I was surprised a lot in this book as I wrote it, which I always, I don't know, to me, that's when you're doing something right, is when the characters just kind of take it and run. So they know more than we do.
And you've got Nettie also. She also played a large role.
Lydia's little girl, Nettie, yes. And I think sometimes she's a 4, and I think children are, there's an expression, out of the mouth of babes, and they see things differently than we do. And sometimes we can learn so much if we just see and listen and hear. And I think that's what Nettie was for them.
So Amanda, you have like a bunch of characters. So so you got to talk about Millie and
Okay.
And obviously Bailey, but
Okay.
Anyone else you want to add to it? Go.
Okay. So in my World of Harvest, Ohio, which is set in Holmes County, there's the 2 series, the Amish Candy Shop series, which has been going on for several years. And then last year, I also launched the spin-off, the Amish Matchmaker Mysteries. So the protagonist for the candy shop is Bailey King. She's a New York City trained chocolatier. Her father left the Amish when he was young, so she didn't grow up Amish. She grew up in Connecticut in kind of an affluent upper middle class area, lived in New York City, but the summers she would go and stay with her Amish grandparents in Ohio, learned how to make candy in their old Amish candy shop. And when her grandfather becomes ill in the first book, she goes back to Ohio. And as you do in a cozy mystery, somehow she finds a body and then she ends up staying and solving murders along the way. She's very loyal and to her grandparents, and she's very curious, which are two great characteristics of any sleuth. And then Kensington was happy with the candy shop and they wanted me to write more Amish. And I just asked them if I could put it in the same world. I think all of us have written multiple series, and I didn't want to have to create another Amish town that would be pretty similar to the one I already had when I already had all the elements. And they said, sure, you can put it there, but it needs to be as different as possible. So my protagonist is a 67-year-old Amish matchmaker. Her name's Millie Fisher, and she's a widow. She never had any children, so she's just been in the town helping the young Amish find each other. And she also comes upon becoming a sleuth because she is helping young Amish men and women, and then runs into these crazy situations. So, and matchmaking can be murder. The first book, her niece is about to marry the wrong man. And Millie knows it's wrong. The niece finally comes around and decides it's wrong, and then the young man shows up dead in the niece's greenhouse. So as you can imagine, Millie has to get involved and solve the crime. The only other character that I want to add about that series is Millie's best friend Lois, who I adore. She is also 67, but she is the complete opposite. She loves to gamble. She's been married like 4 or 5 times. She has bright red spiky hair, and she loves costume jewelry and makeup. So they're kind of a Lucy and Ethel, so they're really fun to write.
And also Cass, right? Cass is
yeah, and the Amish candy shop, my protagonist, Bailey's best friend, is Cass Calbera, and she is a total New York City girl, wears all black, half of her hair is dyed purple. She's really cool, and every time she comes to Ohio, she thinks she's coming to like another planet, which it kind of is compared to New York City. And then my most the character people love the most is Jethro the polka dotted pig. He's on all the book covers, so you've probably seen pictures of him.
Okay, so now I'm just curious, because you all somehow were able to incorporate some Amish culture into your stories, and that was kind of, for me as a reader, it's kind of cool because you kind of get to know the Amish more. And so I'm going to start with you, Laura. I know when we talked about the excommunication and why Caleb wasn't excommunicated. You could start there or go somewhere else. So
yeah, I really get into more exploration of the Amish culture in the Cozy series. But yeah, I like to do my research in Lancaster because, as you all know, the Old Order Amish in Lancaster does things differently than Old Order Amish in Holmes County and Shipshewana and everywhere else. There's always little differences. And it's fun when readers kind of call that to your attention and tell you you're wrong, but that's because they know one area and it's not the same as another area. But for me, I've always been fascinated by the excommunication when they leave after baptism. There's some that will still have a relationship, but it's usually on the quiet. I just find that dynamic very interesting, that for the most part, if somebody leaves after baptism, regardless of the reason, they're done with the family. And yet this same group of people can be so forgiving also. When they had that big school shooting in Pennsylvania, nickel mine, 11, 12 years ago, within 24 hours, the entire community was offering forgiveness to the shooter's widow and embracing them. But yet if somebody leaves their own community because they want to do something else, maybe they decide they want to become an EMT, or they want to become a police officer, is what I had happen in my Cozy series, then they don't have a relationship anymore. And I'm kind of fascinated by that. So it's kind of an interesting thing.
You also talk about God's will, right? I mean, that
yes.
everything, it's like explained through God's will, which
yep. That's a lot of it is, that they really believe that when there's a death, that it's God's will, but at the same respect, they're humans, so they're still gonna mourn just like anyone else. I'm sure they have their own, kind of, why did this happen, or the questioning, but yet, because they're so rooted in faith, that, that's what carries them through, and that's admirable, so.
Okay, and Amanda, you, I think a lot of the Amish books, but you really show the difference between quote unquote the English and the Amish. And I'd like, if you want to discuss that or something else, go for it.
Yeah, because I think in Holmes County there's so many different kinds of Amish, more so than maybe in other parts of the country that have Amish. Mm-hmm. They have we have Schwarzentrooper Amish that are like so strict. Like they don't have the triangles on the back of their buggies if they get in a buggy accident and someone is killed. It, like Laura said, it's God's will, but they don't make any, they don't put headlights or anything on their buggies to avoid that from happening. And then we have New Order Amish, that there is an Amish man a couple years ago that was on the public schools on the school board. He got elected to the school board. So we have, the whole gamut. And I think that's what's interesting to write about this area, because then you have also Mennonites here, and then the English, and how do they interact? It's like immediate conflict. And I think the big differences between the Amish and the English is just their, overall worldview. Like Laura was saying, the Amish are rooted in faith and family, and things happen because it's God's will. So in the English world, we're very independent, and we're going to make this happen, and I'm going to exceed, and I'm going to do this. When in the Amish world, it's community. We're going to do this together if God wills it. So that, I think that's the big difference.
Right. And in Marta, in your book, I had a laugh because I have to tell this story very quickly. You have something happening, and Dorcas says, go into my desk and get the cell phone out and call 911. And I remember going into Amish country, and I saw this Amish girl, and she was on her cell phone. And I went up to her and I go, wait a minute, you guys aren't supposed to use that. And she goes, oh, yeah, we can use it if we work. And I went, oh, okay. And we both started laughing. So talk about that scene, Marta, where they needed the cell phone, as opposed to some stories I know they always say, we walked to the corner and used the phone that was there on the corner or something.
Right. Well, for the most part, all of my books are set in central Pennsylvania, which is where I live, so that's what I know best. And for the most part, people use phones sparingly, and the phones are generally outside the house in a phone shanty, a small shed that's not right inside the house. And the reason is that if you had a phone too readily available, you would be spending your time depending on it and chatting on it and instead of interacting with the person who is right in front of you. And but teenagers in particular do have cell phones. That is very common. In fact, I was talking to a fellow he has several teenage sons, and he had been using a cell phone because he was in, I think it was in construction, and he needed to be able to get in touch with his clients when he was, on another job. So he was using a cell phone, and he said when his boys got to be teenagers, he realized that they were watching him, and he was undoubtedly using the cell phone more for convenience than because it was necessary. And so he gave up the cell phone to set an example for his sons. That's the sort of thinking that I think pervades the Amish, that if you need to sacrifice something, then you do for somebody else. And that particular scene, she needed help immediately. And so she had a cell phone in her desk. She's a teacher. And I think particularly since the Nickel Mines case, people have become much more aware of the danger presented to schools. And so I think it would be unusual to find an Amish school where there wasn't some way of immediately contacting someone else. Either there's another house that's close enough somebody can run to it, or there is a cell phone which is only used in emergencies. And so that's how that particular scene worked in. And I didn't have any ulterior motives for that. I knew she would have a cell phone available, and so she used it when it was needed.
Cool. Okay, so unfortunately, time goes by way too fast. So we have, a few minutes left. I want to know what each of you would like to say in closing. It could be your next book. I know I always ask you guys about that when I'm interviewing you, or something else you'd like us to know. So why don't we start with you, Amanda?
Well, I actually had a book come out today, but it wasn't Amish. So my book, Mums in Mayhem, came out today. It's a magical, a magic garden mystery. So I write light paranormal cozies as well as the Amish. And then in a couple weeks, I have my first mystery for Hallmark coming out. It's called Dead End Detective, and it's my first PI novel. But it's still, I would say it's PI cozy. It's not hard boiled, but it was a little bit, I'll say, easier to get my protagonist to have to solve the crime when it's their job. You don't have to be like, oh, like it's my cousin's friend's thinger. Like once a series gets really long, you have to get more creative. So yeah, those are the things coming out. And then my next Amish mystery is Courting Candy Killer, which will be the second in the Amish Matchmaker, and that comes out in November.
Oh, very nice. So you'll be back from your honeymoon. Yeah, wait, if we can go on honeymoons with the virus.
Well, I'm actually, for my honeymoon, we decided to just go to Holmes County because we can't go anywhere. And then we're going to go hopefully next year to New Orleans is the plan when things settle.
Yeah. Well, good luck.
Thank you.
What about you, Laura? What would you like to?
Well, me, I'm just, since it's only been 2 weeks since Piece by Piece, I'm just trying to put that out there and out there and out there. And then I guess the big thing is next year I have the fourth one of those coming out called Her New Story. And actually that book will bring back characters from the first three. So that'll be kind of fun. And I have a brand new cozy series, Non-Amish, starting, that'll be out debuting in October of 21. So.
And her new series, is that the one where the journalist is sent to Amish country?
That's in the next women's fiction book, Her New Story, in August.
Okay, so
yeah.
She's sent as like a punishment.
Yes, it's sent as a punishment. She wanted a real juicy story, and as a punishment for missing a scoop, she gets sent to Amish country. So she is, basically hell-bent on finding a good juicy story no matter how she gets it. So, but she will learn something along the way, of course, because that's what women's fiction happens. We learn things.
Okay.
So,
You mean we don't know it already?
What?
Oh, all right, Marta, what about you?
Well, I have 3 series going, the Love Inspired series and the HQN Amish Suspense series, as well as the Big Books for Berkeley. And so I'm never really having any time off in between books. And the publishers are very nice about scheduling them so that I write one and then I switch to, whatever, not the next book in that series, but the next book in another series. So that requires either taking a great many notes so that I don't forget who was who in the books when I come to write their next one, or I just forget, and then I have to go back and reread the book that came before so I can figure out what's going on now. So I'm sure the other ladies will agree with me that a writer's life is not as easy as you might think. We don't just sit down and have everything come out of our brains on demand. So challenging from time to time, but I wouldn't do anything else, and I have no idea of retiring at any time in the near future.
Well, that's good for us fans. So do you know when the books are coming out? Can you kind of give us a heads up about that?
Yes. The books come out next year are going to be, the next book in the Love Inspired series will be first, and it comes out, over the winter it will come out. And it's actually the 5th book in that particular series. And they're kind of fun to write because they're fairly short, and I can be a little lighter in those. And then in the spring, the next book that comes out will be the Amish Secrets, which is a book that I just finished and just turned in, the next in the suspense series. And then on into the end of the summer will be the next Berkeley book, which is Harvest of Love, and will be coming out, as I say, on towards fall. We always would like the books to come out seasonally where they belong, but they don't always, and so we just have to adjust to that. But thank you so much for setting this up. I've just loved meeting these ladies, and it's been a delight.
Well, thank you guys. We really appreciate it. And let's hope that next year we can meet in person,
It'd be nice. Yes, thank you.
I asked you guys to hold up your books because most of the, I have PDFs. It's really hard to hold up a computer. So hold up your books and let us see, So Amanda, one more time, why don't you tell us what your books are?
So this is Marshmallow Malice. This was the 5th in the Amish candy shop, and this is Matchmaking Can Be Murder, and it's the 1st in the Amish Matchmaker series.
And Laura?
Killer Carol, 7th in the Amish Mystery series with Berkeley, and Piece by Piece, Women's Fiction with Kensington.
And Marta?
Yes, the last of the Amish, or most recent of the Amish suspense series, Amish Protector, and Springtime Heart, just available in early July.
Well, thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And good luck. Stay healthy. Stay safe.
You too.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye.